The cost too is dementia and Alzheimer's is still a huge strain on the society as a whole, the social and physical aspect.
Yeah.
The cost stages off as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And kind of one of the biggest factors is like, if we don't want them, hearts don't last forever. I always tell people, I'm like, if you live to be 110, you'll probably have some form of dementia, because you can do everything right, you can have great genetics, and it's part of the deal. So, you want to I'll give people contact information to reach me after the talk today, because any providers, anybody that works with older adults, that's part of my job. So I can provide more trainings and definitely help with these consultations and resources. But you're all right? We're all wondering how we can preserve what we have for as long as possible. And then also we're wondering, are we gonna be the one that gets the genetics that kick up some dementia or Alzheimer's? And the cost of not maintaining brain health it's already a crisis level. So we're behind the game. So guidelines for brain health will be the last thing that we talk about. Most of them are pretty straightforward. I'll at least try to make it entertaining, but it's just kind of gentle reminders of these are really important things. They seem so basic and easy that I think it's easy for people to kind of blow them off or say oh, I won't clean up my diet today, but maybe tomorrow. And it's well, if your brain is inflamed, that's time. That's time that you might be losing. So we'll just go over some of those really important factors that you have in control. So within cognition, mental health professionals break it down into 6 key domains. I can't speak to physical health if this is how it's conceptualized. But we'll go through each one just briefly and just look at kind of some of the functions that coordinate with that area of cognition. So executive functioning is something that if you have we just call it neurospiciness in my family, because we all pretty much have some sort of attention deficit disorder. And so executive functioning is something that you might hear a lot about if you have family members or friends, or you work with people who might be on the autism spectrum. They might have ADHD, things like that, because executive functioning is an area of cognition that's really hard in some of those situations where it's all about planning, reasoning. I say timekeeping, being able to figure out how long a task will be, and then being able to move through kind of your plan or your schedule. dementia, so you could have different types of dementia, and then you can kind of have like an additional Lewy body factor added on there, which would be really, really unfortunate and bad luck, because Lewy bodies is really difficult in comparison to just like regular difficult Alzheimer's. But this part, that social cognition piece, gets hit really hard, and so you'll see people doing behaviors or using like slurs and awful language that are, we refer to as like in the black box in our brain. It's like the moment we're born, we learn like what you can and can't say, what you can and can't do, right? Like rules on how to not get arrested or lose your friends. Everything goes into that black box. And social cognition is really affected with things like Lewy body. And so this is when we get calls from people in our memory care places, and they say, this lady is such a racist. She's calling everybody bad words, and we got to get her out of here. She's just got a heart filled with hate. And then the family comes in and they're like, my mom is not racist. Like, she would never say this. And they're like horrified. And I'm like, it's the black box. And the black box, sadly, is retained throughout the entire disease, but the rules and the filters are all compromised when social cognition, this piece of cognition, is sacrificed or damaged or not functioning anymore. You also might see people like getting calls on, this guy keeps walking around, he keeps going to Fred Meyer with no pants on, right? Have him not get arrested, right? There's just, the rules aren't working anymore. And so this can look like really poor behavior, and it's important to be able to recognize when this is a change in functioning, not somebody actually all of a sudden for the first time in their life becoming socially deviant and being a troublemaker, because people can get in a lot of trouble. People are quick to make assumptions and interpretations of behavior. The other pretty eerie thing is that this is where our ability to be empathic and also recognize emotions. These two things are somewhat tied together, right? So if you're saying something, you're doing something, you're causing hurt or injury to someone, whether it's like emotional, psychological, or actual physical stuff, they're not able to interpret what they're doing. And they're also not able to express empathy anymore. Does anybody know what we call people who don't have empathy? Oh, that's like the baby version. Yeah, so all the way at the top is like sociopaths. I'm on YouTube, so I can't speak to that, but I'm not going to argue with you. I won't deny that. But we have sociopaths and psychopaths, right? And I know a lot of sociopaths. They're not all bad, right? They're not all, serial killers dismembering people while listening to rock in the basement somewhere. Some of these folks are just like, they're very concrete. They don't have access to empathy. So they're wired differently than us, but this is something that can break. It's something that can just stop functioning for any of us if this area of cognition is compromised. So you can imagine how that would be start off as very severe impairment and a brain can heal. Or if someone has an infection and it has them in a state of delirium, they're not going to be able to function very well at all until we get them out of that medical emergency, and then you might see all that functioning come back online. So some of the things that can happen that cause impairment include strokes. I can't remember how many times a patient would come to me and they'd say, oh, this happened, I went in and they asked me, about the strokes that I had, and I had no idea I had any strokes, right? Because you can see sometimes the evidence of having a very teeny tiny stroke that sometimes people don't even notice, all the way to the other end of the continuum, really, really serious strokes, life-threatening strokes that can cause a lot of different cognitive impairments. And I don't know if it's still about 6 months, but in general, you're going to look at around 6 months for people to see if they can come back from that. They can go to speech therapy and different types of providers to coach those cognitive tasks back online, but they can leave lasting impacts. And traumatic brain injury, which is just referred to as TBI for short. Until kind of recently, we would just talk about this in the context of like if people had military service, which I know you said you have been, I forget the base name. ADAC, yeah. I was actually born the North Pole, but Fort Wainwright in Alaska. And I have baby pictures with tons of mosquito bites in them to prove it. But we talk about like, oh, where did you serve? And you were in combat, right? And that's kind of what we thought about when we would talk about brain injury, but really TBIs can happen in so many different ways. And when, my focus is really on older adults right now, but I always tell people too, like a fall, you can have a fall at any age. We're more at risk for having a TBI when we're older because the liquid padding around our brain,
at least on my computer, there's like a sharp sound.
Dry up a little bit as we age, and even just a fall, everyone would say, oh, well, she didn't hit her head. We checked. That was the first thing that was checked. Are you bleeding, and did you hit your head? But you can actually have such an impact that your brain can rock against the inside of your skull. Yeah. And so it's things like that where it's like, we think we can rule those things out, but you get an offender bender, even, and it can rock you enough to bump your brain there. And again, it's a range of these things. So it might be impactful. You might notice some changes in cognition at the beginning, and you might make a full recovery. So Alzheimer's disease is another one. This is our most common type of dementia in the United States. It's affecting millions and millions of people. The Alzheimer's Association, I'm a volunteer for them, community educator for them. So if any of you are interested, you can always reach out to me. And I've offered, they have a series like, okay, well, it's drying out your brain. It's like sucking all the water out of your brain. So we use those things hopefully on a limited basis, but some medications that we really, really need can have big impacts on our cognitive functioning. So we always want to, look at medication changes first when we see changes in cognition, and then we want to work with providers or I think they're just such an untapped resource of pharmacists, right? They're wizards. They're wizards and nobody thinks to ask them. So I just say, go to your pharmacist and ask them to look at your medications if you notice something weird, and they should be able to look it over and just tell you if there's anything, that might be causing those cognitive impairments or anything that maybe doesn't play nice in the sandbox. And then you go back to your prescriber and see if you can make some changes. Depression is one of our mood disorders. It's a most common mood disorder. Also anxiety in the United States, but depression definitely carries with it some changes to cognition. So I've worked with people, they're grieving, they have clinical depression, and then they come to me and would say, I think I've got dementia. And I'm like, well, you're 29, so I think you're probably good, but tell me what's going on. And we can link it back to a mood disorder. So a lot of these things mimic bigger and badder things. So I always tell people the key really is try not to worry, because worry won't help your cognitive function either, and then just make sure you work with your healthcare professionals to get a good diagnosis. And then vitamin B12 deficiency. This is one of the ones where I always say, like, until we get a diagnosis, it can be something that simple where you can get a vitamin injection today and you can have your memory restored in the next couple of weeks. So I always say, don't forget the basics and work with your healthcare professionals. So anybody want to guess when the average person's cognition peaks? When are we like the sharpest? And it's okay if you want to say what age you are right now if you're really if you're really feeling it.
45.
45. Are you 45?
Yeah.
Okay.
12.
I have a 10-year-old and she would say, yeah, she's really like close. It's actually around 40. Okay, so around 40, and again, we're all different. These are really general. If you do a search through all like meta-analyses, you'll find lots of different numbers, but in general, it's around 4 decades of life. And that's when our peak cognition is really cruising. Any guesses to when we start to unpeak? When things start to get a little bit more challenging, when we might start noticing things? 60?
I'm 55, and I noticed, like, I don't know if I've ever really like things that used to be where I could really focus on the hours.
Okay, so you're noticing some changes that could be due to other things, right? I always wonder as our lives get busier, or sometimes when you got everything squared away and then you're like maybe bored or you're like, you know, in different places, I always wonder like how much does that impact our perception of like how sharp we are? So it's about 40 years of age, and then around 60 is when we might start to decline, but it's actually usually in the 60s that we're still making all of these like accommodations. We're using resources, sticky notes. I don't know if anyone still uses those. But yeah, we're able, because we have all this lived experience, right? It's not like our IQ decreases. And so we can make all of these adjustments and use tools and resources. And I set reminders on my smartwatch, sometimes by accident. And so we might not notice these things until we're closer to 70. But again, genetics, environmental stuff, you know, how busy you are. Sometimes people notice that their cognition feels less sharp when they're actually not being kind of healthily stressed by learning and growth and things like that. So normal age-related changes that we'll all go through to some degree at some point. So certain parts of our brain shrink. So we notice mass loss, specifically around volume loss around the areas that are important to learning and other complex mental tasks. We notice an increase in general of neuroinflammation, so just inflammation of the brain. We notice a reduction in the blood flow in the brain. And we notice some diminished communication between neurons or nerve cells in certain regions of the brain. And we see changes in neurotransmitters and hormones, which those are complicated things to describe, and each person's brain is going to do them at a different pace and will look a little bit differently. But in general, our brains are changing as we age, and we expect those things.
So is there like, and I understand everybody's different, but is there an age that like neuroplasticity stops and you can't make new pathways, or can you
No.
continue to create this impact?
Well, we've all heard you can't teach an old dog new tricks, and I had one Jack Russell that I'd say that might be true, but she was just really stubborn. But we know now that neuroplasticity, we can create new brain cells at our dying breath, right? It takes work. It's not going to be a Sudoku or a word search or the hardest crossword puzzle you've ever had, which I bum a lot of people out whenever I mention that. They're like, I've been really sharpening my mind with word finds, and I'm like, me too, since like kindergarten, but it's not going to cut it. you have to actually stress your brain, right, before you can get this brand new baby neuron. So, and we're going to talk about some of the ways that you can do that, but I don't want to like overpromise and under-deliver. You have to work for it. You have to earn it. The other thing, if I can remember the phrase right, this woman at one point was talking about how to create like all these new brain cells so that she had kind of a store of them. And she said, the more you have to lose before you lose it. And to remember that concept, I just imagined like a little squirrel, like going out and finding all of these little acorns and storing them up, right? And so as the brain ages, you still have, it's like your roommate, right? You said with pens.
With all of her pens.
Yeah, you've got this plethora of pens, and so my thing is like always do the best that you can to take care of the brain cells that you have right now, but always keep striving to create new brain cells. So I do some pretty wonky stuff. My family could tell you lots of stories. I'll like put my glasses at the restaurant. I'll have my water at my left hand because I'm primarily right-handed. So I'll do all sorts of things to like strain my brain right with my left hand, mix things up just to keep it active. So I think why this topic is so important is because I personally want to have the best quality of life. What did somebody call it? They called it their health span versus their lifespan in a conference we did today. And I think that's really smart. I want to be able to function at the highest level that I can for as long as I can. So what that means for most of us is not only preserving the brain health that we have, but also constantly working on little things so that we can maintain and increase that brain health too. So brain health, it's like the mothership of all the things, right? If our brain isn't working very well, then nothing else is really going to work as well as it can. It can mean our ability or not to care for ourselves and live independently, have all those things and enjoy all those things that we've worked so hard to have. And so those are really meaningful, especially for people in America. I can't speak to other countries. They do things a little bit differently and look at kind of independence differently than we do in our country. But now we're going to talk about some strategies that you can do. And again, I don't promise that you will be mind blown by any of these things, but it's just kind of a slightly pushy reminder that if you focus on some of these things and you just get them, kind of incorporated into your life, and you constantly figure out like, what am I going to do? What am I really going to focus on now for my brain health? I always try to keep something in mind for that. So learning creates new neuronal synapses, which give you more reserve. That's that your acorns, right, or your pen reserve. So higher education at any age is shown to be protective. I'm an instructor out at the community college now. I wasn't when I made this slide deck, but I see people of all ages taking these courses now, and they're not working for a degree. They're going in there to like strain the brain and have some new brain cells be born, which I think is super cool. So this is just one example, but my thing last year, every year now, instead of like the New Year's resolution, I'm like, what am I going to do to hurt my brain? Like hurt it in a good way, make it make it frustrated. I decided to learn how to knit, so I bought a kids kit from Michael's and I made a scarf, and it was horribly frustrating, and I'm pretty sure I knocked out like a couple brain cells out of that. And then January of 2024, I challenged myself to learn how to do sourdough. Apparently this was the thing that everybody else did at like the start of the pandemic. I missed the mark on that. So I did that, which there are other health benefits to sourdough, which keeping your blood sugar, since you're over there drinking a squirt. So I've learned a lot of things, but what am I doing this year? Oh, last year I also decided that I was going to learn how to speak French. So
you can take flute lessons at the rec center.
Thank you. This is your plug, right? So just find something that hopefully you enjoy, because it's hard to stick with things that are hard if you don't enjoy them, or if you don't see kind of that, what's the value gonna be, right? The value for me is like, I might not make anything edible for months, feeding and nurturing these awkward, smelly sourdough starters, call ours the yeasty boys. But in a couple months, I'm gonna have some bread. And that for me was worth all of the the trouble and concentration issues. Okay, so find something that's going to have value for you, that can enrich your life. And just know that if it doesn't frustrate you, if it's too easy, it's probably not going to work. It's not going to give you some new brain cells. Okay. This is not my grandfather, but this is what we refer to as fly catching. So this is not how to take meaningful naps, by the way. Getting sleep, getting rest, getting downtime is so incredibly important to the brain. I always ask people, like, if your computer doesn't work or a cord is being fussy, like, what do we do, right? We unplug it, we plug it back in, we power it down. My iPhone, it just becomes a paperweight at times, and it's like it needs an update. It needs to power down, sort its stuff out, and come back online. So in our country, like, sleep is a crisis. So if you can figure out if you do have sleep issues, if you feel sleepy during the day more than normal, or if you're not getting, decent sleep or decent rest at night, that's something to definitely work with somebody on. It can be really frustrating figuring out how to get good sleep. But when we power down, we are actually having a lot of things taken care of. I imagine like a cleaning crew coming into my brain at night, and they're dusting things, they're cleaning out cobwebs, they're picking up spills and clearing toxins and things. And so if we don't power down and get to that space, then all that gunk is going to sit in there and just build up over time. It's really, really important for memory. And so also with the cleaning crew, I have my person, she's my filing person, and she comes in and she puts everything that I learned, all the things I need to remember, and she files for me, but she only works night shift. Okay, so if I don't go to sleep, she can't come in, and then I don't have those memories stored. I'm not going to be able to retrieve that information, which could look like other things, right? It could look like dementia or some big bad cognitive problem, but it could just be that I'm not getting good rest. Most of us need to still aim for 6 to 8 hours of sleep per night. If you're one of the lucky people who is like, I've only ever needed 4 hours and I fall asleep like a tired little bunny and I wake up ready to go in the morning, like, first of all, you are blessed, and I would love to know your secret. Most of us just need like 6 to 8. I'm a 9-hour person because it takes me a little bit longer to get into sleep. I've always needed about 9. So part of it is like, trust yourself. If you've only needed, 4 hours, or you've been great at 7, like, find your sweet spot and stick with it. One of the bummers is that as we age, our circadian rhythm, our sleep-wake cycle starts to, how should we say it, become disjointed, we'll say. So I would just say, manage your expectations. There is cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia. So if you have access to an LCSW, a psychologist, behaviorist, someone who can offer some therapy for this, and give you strategies for improving sleep. But the main thing is, I just say, concentrate on getting rest. Because the more frustrated you get about not sleeping the way that you used to sleep, it's not going to happen. It's not going to get better with time. We know that it just kind of gets wonky. Living at the coast has been even a bigger challenge for rest. So explore gadgets. So the happy lights are really an interesting gadget that can help with circadian rhythm, making sure that at the end of the day in your house, it should be getting gradually darker, as if we don't have electricity, right? And that helps our brains know that it's time to release melatonin. Don't be taking gallons of melatonin at night. People really love that with the hope of sleeping well. But just figure out your sleep issue, figure out how to get some good rest. And it is okay to supplement rest with naps, as long as you're not doing it like this guy. I always tell people to be intentional about it. Try not to do it too close to when you want to be actually going to bed for the evening. We want to make sure that it just doesn't happen on its own, right? And so I work from home a lot of the time, so I have it a little bit easier. But if I know that I really just need to power down, even if it's for a short time, I will usually go to my bedroom. I will usually, put the lights off and make things quiet and kind of get things set up as I would for a normal night's rest. We don't want to take too long of a nap. That's the other thing too. my mom would call me and she's like, I just had a great 4-hour nap. And I'm like, I don't think that that's a nap. That's like more sleep than I get some nights. Bless you. So just be mindful of where it's happening, how long. If you need to set an alarm, do that. But we know it can feel really restorative just to close your eyes and get some peace and quiet for a couple minutes. That can be really helpful. Brain on fire, right? We need to manage our stress. And it is super easy for me to sit up here and tell you that. It is really, really hard for some of us to do it. So I always tell people, as behaviorists, find the stressors, be realistic with yourself. Which stressors can you actually just fix? Find the ones that you can't fix. And then you got to problem solve those. You have to figure out how, hopefully, to minimize their impact on you. Because not everything that stresses us out is something that we have in our control, but a lot of it really is. So acute and chronic stress will increase inflammation in the brain. We need to make stress-reducing activities part of our daily routine. You can come to your local rec center if you need. Physical activity is a great way to reduce stress. But yeah, it's not something that people do well when they just say it's like this ancillary thing. They're like, I used to work for Samaritan, 10-hour days with, add travel onto that, getting all my work done. And I'd say, well, when I get home from work, if I have the energy, I'll go to yoga. Do you know how many times I went to yoga when that was my mindset? Like never. Honestly, the thought of having to wrangle my body into yoga pants, I was like, does this count as my workout? Because that's kind of all I had, right? And I could never let myself sit down when I'd come home. Because I'm like, if I sit down, it's game over, right? And so I realized, like, I have to practice what I preach. This has to be something that is just as important as all the other things on my to-do list. Because if you can really work some stress management in, then it's something that I think generally helps us function better. We feel better. We don't have to work as hard at feeling better. And then things like deep breathing or diaphragmatic breathing techniques are a really great option too. These are helpful because if we don't have the same time, the luxury of time and being able to go out and do other activities, something you can do anywhere. It's free. You don't have to wear, stretchy pants to do it. And this can help ground us and kick us out of that fight or flight response. Being in fight or flight to any degree is just soup, like toxic soup that our brain sits in all day long. And most of us have become so normalized to being in part of that state. It's just really damaging for our overall health, but certainly our brain health. So staying engaged. This too, I'm so happy to have 4 people actually sitting in chairs in person with me because the pandemic, it made it easier for us to do the things that we need to do from home and online. But it really increased the divide that we are already seeing, especially for older adults. So loneliness and isolation is something that I've been talking about as an issue for over a decade. And then people of all ages felt it. They felt it, they felt their depression and their anxiety, and they were like, oh my gosh, this is so horrible. I'm like, yeah, I guess we all needed to really feel it and experience it ourselves to understand how serious it is. But these things are really, really critical to our cognitive well-being. And so when I try to avoid social isolation, all of us in here probably have different levels of need for what is meaningful connection. That could mean how many minutes we want to be out with friends, how many friends we actually need to connect with in a day or a week or a month. I always usually have somebody say, well, what about solitude? And I'm like, I love solitude. But most of us are not designed to just be an island. So it's okay if you want to not spend very much social time, but figure out ways, whatever ways work for you to stay engaged. I personally like to do a lot of volunteer work. Everyone will say, oh, you're such a saint, you're so generous. And I'm like, volunteering is like so selfish. I love how good it makes me feel. And I'm like, I always, people always tell you that. You can soak it up if you like it. But I'm always like, go volunteer. You'll realize like it's not selfless at all. Like you get such a good feeling. And generally you'll find like-minded people serving with you, and then you get to like be out in your community in a kind of different role than whatever you do for work or pleasure.
We need youth coaches.
We need youth coaches. Shameless plugs.
Right.
We need youth coaches.
Oh, what's that entail?
For different sports leagues.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
We'll have forms stuffed
Right.
sneakily in your purse as you leave tonight. And utilize technology when there are mobility or transportation issues, or if you just don't have the time to travel. Or, we had some folks leave because they were worried about the roads freezing up, right? Like sometimes we're like, there's trees falling down everywhere on Highway 20. Like we really want to go do that thing, but we want to stay alive to see another day. And so if you want to stay at home, our one silver lining from the pandemic is that everybody got on board with technology. We're able to see our doctors and do all sorts of different things over our computers now. So it's important not to forget about those things. Move your bodies, okay? So moving, I just think about it as like you're breaking free some of the junk, right? In your body and your brain, you're getting it to clear out, okay? So moving our body does reduce inflammation and plaques in the brain. And talking about amyloid plaques, which are a key characteristic to how Alzheimer's does its dirty work. It kind of junks it all up. And so we know that some meaningful movement can help reduce the risk for Alzheimer's disease, and it also promotes the birth of new neurons in the hippocampus. It may improve, right? We don't oversell, but it's pretty likely that it'll improve your mood and your sleep. If you've ever raised a puppy or a human child, you take them to the park, you play with them, right? You do some brain games or read or tire them out. They sleep, they're cheerful, right? They get that big boost of all those feel-good neurotransmitters, and you can too. So I know it's not super easy to do that all the time because, again, it takes time and energy. But I always just tell people, like, if you go bowling, I find myself smiling while I'm holding my towels sometimes, which seems really sick, but I'm like, okay, I'm moving my body, doing the dishes. I don't get a good workout from the sourdough thing, but we can find a way to make that happen. So figure out some activity. Try to have a good variety, especially if you do live on the coast, right? If you plan on being a walker every day, an outdoor walker every day, you can manage that maybe, 3 months collectively out of the year. So also get good rain gear. What? Raincoats. I love it.
Norwegians say there is no bad weather, there's only bad gear.
Exactly, and they're right. As long as we can afford that good gear comes, man, REI has got me.
And we have an indoor track.
We have an indoor track. So, and we, it used to be like, I remember my grandma was always going over to the mall.
Yeah.
She's just cruising at the mall. That was the spot. And I'm like, we don't have a good mall here. We need, like in Albany, they have a mall. You got your morning people. But yeah, just find something that you enjoy. It does not have to be, training for a marathon or anything like that. I always joke, but like kind of not. My dad used to always eat the Dinty Moore stew. Like it's pretty hearty stuff. I don't know if it's actually designed for human consumption, but I'm like, if you've got some cans in the pantry, you can sit and watch TV and pump some beef stew, So it doesn't have to be expensive. It can just be whatever you can do in the space that you have with the energy that you have. And I always tell people, as you get older too, seems like there's a longer lag from like when you start doing the physical activity and then when you actually feel good about it and when you get that kickback. For me, it's like 4 months now. I started exercising. I'm like, it'll be fine. You'll feel better, in summertime, right? But it takes my body a much longer time for me to kind of reap the benefits, really feel more energy, that better sleep, that mood improvement. If I'm going for weight loss or whatever it is, it just takes a little bit longer for my body. So we're all different in that way. But having a nice variety is great too. And then if you can get your pals together, I always say if we could walk to like Abby's Pizza or like a donut shop or something, like that would get me, likely involved with a walking group. But going bowling with friends, any way you can tie in other people, then you kind of get more bang for your buck because you're getting that social interaction, you're getting the movement, that connectivity, things like that. All right, you are what you eat. It's an age-old adage, but it is very, very true. I always try to remember to garbage in, garbage out. So if you're eating super junky, you'll probably feel pretty junky. So has anybody heard about blue zones? I'm assuming
Yeah.
no?
Yeah.
Yes? No? Okay. So blue zones, we have a lot of research. I don't know how long they've been researching blue zones, but they've identified places in the world where people are frequently living to 100 or older. Okay, and then they're looking at what are they doing? How are their lifestyles different than us? So their diets are generally very different than the American diet, as you might imagine. They also just still do their own things for themselves. So they still do their own laundry. They still walk around and shop for their groceries, things that we're like, it's a luxury or we don't have enough time. But all those little steps, all that movement, right, in those lifestyles where they're more active really adds up. But the diet that is really defined as like kind of the healthiest overall, but also certainly most health promoting, not only for like cardiac health, but also neuro health, is the Mediterranean diet. So the Mediterranean diet is really vegetable heavy, some fruits, some legumes, some whole grains, olive oil, fish and poultry. I just learned because I listened to a podcast on the blue zones and the diets that they were talking about. It's really, really limited, even with fish and poultry. It's really, really limited. They're not eating a lot of meat. They're eating a lot of legumes. They're eating a lot of beans and rice and things like that, and a lot of vegetables. And I still stick this in there just to get a couple more people to buy in, because I know we're big about wine. You can have wine. You can have wine. In moderation, because then everybody gets excited, and so it can be helpful. But I always recommend, like, if your diet, when you look at this list, looks vastly different, pick one thing. Like for me, I'm not ever going to give up butter completely. I'm not going to do it. I refuse. I love butter and I need it for my sourdough. But can I sub and use olive oil more often than not? Of course I can. I can do that. We've got infused olive oil. We can get the garlic olive oil. We can do whatever we want. Okay, so find one swap or one thing that you can try to start gradually implementing into your life. So I don't eat fruits very much, so I started doing like a fruit smoothie. And I had to do a lot of work to figure out how to actually make a healthy smoothie instead of what is really just a milkshake with some fruit in it. Because people are like, put juice in there and put the yogurt in there. And I was just like, I'm not a nutritionist, but this tastes too good to be like a blue zone situation. And it was. So I stripped it way back and I kind of figured out some ways to actually reap the benefits of it without giving myself a different problem. And find some vegetables you like. Air fryers. I don't know how I ever lived without one. You can do zucchini in there, throw a little panko on them. I love the air fryer, and it makes it super quick and easy to make some of these foods. All right, so the other key thing that I want to promote is if you're making heart healthy choices, you're making neuro healthy choices. If you're making neuro healthy choices, you're supporting cardiac health too. So buy one, get one. Nothing comes easy with this kind of stuff, but in this situation, they're very, very heavily correlated. And then this diet can actually help preserve brain volume, which one of the normal age-related changes that we talked about, I think it's my first point on that slide, is that we lose volume in our brains. Even if we don't have, something like Alzheimer's disease where you lose a lot of volume. So it can keep it nice and healthy for a little bit longer. And we have reached the end of our talk. Pretty good time. We have about 8-ish minutes if anybody has questions or comments or concerns.
So like evidence-based practice to exercise the brain needs to be something challenging to do.
Mm-hmm.
I like your example, try to write, become an ambidextrous.
Yeah.
What about musical instruments? Are those?
Yes, those are going to be really, really good. So learning a new language, learning a new musical instrument, learning how to, if you already know how to play a lot of instruments, learning to use that instrument in a different way, learning a new piece of music. So one of the ones that people talk about is they said if you're a dancer, right, because they were like, this is how you can get so many different benefits. They said, go to a dance class with all your friends and learn a new dance. So you're moving, you got the social part, and then you're going to strain the brain a little bit to learn a different style or learn something different. It has to be something different, or using something maybe that you're familiar with in a different way. And so for me, I get frustrated pretty easy when my brain's working hard. So I'm like, if I didn't get frustrated, I probably didn't do the thing. So like learning how to knit was, even though it was a child's kit, and I did that intentionally because I was like, this is going to be really hard for me, especially learning directions. I'm not good with spatial tasks. Learning directions from like a printed off one-dimensional thing with like all these different loops and things. It was really frustrating, but I was like, wow, I probably got some new brain cells that day. So make it fun. You got to make it worth it. That's been the thing that I realized for myself is like, it has to be something that I am really excited about. Otherwise, I'm not going to have the perseverance. So like learning a new language, the Duolingo app, it's not free, but it does seem pretty reasonable. And I have been learning things. Like there was closed captioning the other night with French on it, and I'm like, whoa, like I was like looking down at my phone, I think, and I realized that I was understanding what they were saying. And so it's those moments where I'm like, I didn't think an app that, you know, I haven't chucked my phone across the room a single time. And I was like, wow, that's really impressive. I'm learning a thing. It's very frustrating every single day, but it's fun enough to keep me engaged. And the value is that, you know, hey, I don't have to look at the screen. I can take my glasses off while I watch something in French now. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's gotta be frustrating. It's gotta be hard work. And the same thing goes to I think we were doing a fall prevention. It was a physical therapist from Samaritan. We did a fall prevention workshop a couple years ago. And he was talking about studies that were like talking about how to improve like bone density and things like that to reduce falls, and what you have to do physically to create like improved bone density and things like that. It's the same concept. It's like you have to lift so much weight. You have to have such a heavy impact to get your body to change. And it's the same concept with the cognition. You have to really strain it, really push it past wherever it's comfortable, and then you can reap the benefits of that.
We are offering flute lessons. If you or anybody you know might be interested, we have group lessons. We're hoping to start next week, but if we don't get enough people to sign up, we'll put it off a little bit. And we do have flutes to borrow if people do not have flutes. So.
I stole my recorder from third grade.
The fingerings are similar.
Cool. So like
you're halfway there already.
I'm halfway there. Yeah, as long as they're close together, because my fingers are bizarrely short. So, but yeah, flute lessons would be cool. Probably still do hot cross buns if you're really trying.